Sicily, July 1943. 11th, Z0 p.m. General George S. Patton, Jr. stands in his tent, staring at a map. His Third Army has just captured Palermo. His tanks have driven 100 miles in 4 days. His soldiers are exhausted but victorious. He has outmaneuvered the enemy, seized key objectives, and proven that American forces can fight as aggressively as any army in the world. And he has just received orders to halt, not from the Germans, not from logistical constraints, not from enemy resistance, from Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery, commander of the British Eighth Army. Montgomery has convinced the overall commander, General Alexander, that the main Allied effort should focus on the eastern side of Sicily, where Montgomery's forces are advancing. Patton's army is to play a supporting role. They are to protect Montgomery's flank. They are to wait. Patton throws his helmet across the tent. He curses. He rages. He calls Montgomery every name he can think of, and Patton's vocabulary is extensive. His aides stand silently, accustomed to his outbursts, but this time it is different. This time Patton is not just angry. He is humiliated. He believes that Montgomery has stolen his thunder, that the British are treating the Americans as second-rate soldiers, that his moment of glory has been taken from him by a cautious, methodical, self-promoting British officer who cares more about his own reputation than winning the war. This is not the first time Patton and Montgomery have clashed. It will not be the last. For the next 2 years, through Sicily, Italy, France, Belgium, and Germany, the two men will compete, argue, and undermine each other. They will race for objectives. They will fight for supplies. They will criticize each other to their superiors, to journalists, and to anyone who will listen. Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander, will spend almost as much time managing the rivalry between Patton and Montgomery as he does managing the war against Germany. He will plead with them to cooperate. He will issue orders demanding unity. He will threaten to relieve them both. Nothing works. The animosity is too deep, the ego's too large, the difference is too fundamental. History remembers Patton and Montgomery as two of the greatest generals of World War II. Patton, the aggressive, profane, flamboyant American tank commander who believed in speed, audacity, and relentless attack. Montgomery, the meticulous, cautious, methodical British Field Marshal who believed in careful planning, overwhelming firepower, and minimizing casualties. Both men won battles. Both men were respected by their soldiers. Both men played crucial roles in defeating Nazi Germany, but they despised each other. And the question is, why? The easy answer is personality. Patton was a warrior. Montgomery was a manager. Patton believed in inspiration. Montgomery believed in preparation. Patton led from the front. Montgomery planned from headquarters. They were opposites in almost every way, but the real answer is deeper. It is about national pride, professional rivalry, military philosophy, and the bruised egos of two men who each believed he was the greatest general of his generation, and could not stand the thought that the other might be his equal. This is the story of why Patton hated Montgomery, not just disliked, not just disagreed with, hated, with a passion that bordered on obsession, with a fury that never faded, with a resentment that lasted until the day he died. To understand the hatred, we must first understand the men. George S. Patton, Jr. was born in 1885 in California. He came from a wealthy family with a long military tradition. His grandfather had been a Confederate colonel killed in the Civil War. Patton grew up idolizing military heroes. He read obsessively about Alexander the Great, Hannibal, Napoleon, and Robert E. Lee. He believed he was destined for greatness, that he had been born to lead armies in battle. He attended West Point, graduating in 1909. He was an athlete, a horseman, and a swordsman. He competed in the 1912 Olympics in the modern pentathlon. He served under General John J. Pershing in the pursuit of Pancho Villa in Mexico. In World War I, he became one of the first American officers to command tanks. He was wounded in battle and awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. Between the wars, Patton studied armored warfare. He read everything he could find on tanks, mobility, and combined arms. He corresponded with British and French tank theorists. He developed his own philosophy of war: speed, aggression, and relentless attack. He believed that the way to win battles was to hit the enemy hard, fast, and without mercy. Hesitation was weakness. Caution was cowardice. A commander's job was to inspire his men, to lead from the front, to attack always and retreat never. Patton was profane, theatrical, and larger than life. He wore ivory-handled revolvers. He slapped soldiers he thought were cowards. He gave speeches filled with obscenity and bravado. He believed in reincarnation, convinced that he had fought in previous lives as a Roman legionnaire, a soldier under Napoleon, and a cavalryman in the Civil War. He was brilliant, unstable, and impossible to ignore. Bernard Law Montgomery was born in 1887 in London. His father was a bishop. His childhood was strict, religious, and dominated by a harsh, unloving mother. Montgomery rebelled quietly, retreating into books and study. He attended Sandhurst, the British Military Academy, and was commissioned in 1908. In World War I, Montgomery served as an infantry officer on the Western Front. He was shot through the lung in 1914 and nearly died. He recovered and returned to the front, where he spent the next 4 years in the trenches. He learned the cost of bad planning, poor coordination, and reckless attacks. He saw thousands of men slaughtered in futile offensives. He vowed that if he ever commanded an army, he would never waste lives. Between the wars, Montgomery became a student of military theory. He taught at staff colleges. He wrote training manuals. He studied the German blitzkrieg and analyzed what made it successful: coordination between infantry, armor, and air support, concentration of force at decisive points, and meticulous planning. He concluded that battles were won not by heroic charges, but by preparation, logistics, and overwhelming superiority at the point of attack. Montgomery was methodical, cautious, and obsessed with control. He did not drink. He did not smoke. He went to bed at the same time every night. He planned every operation in exhaustive detail. He refused to attack until he was certain he had enough men, enough tanks, enough ammunition, and enough air support. He believed in set-piece battles, carefully orchestrated assaults where nothing was left to chance. Montgomery was also arrogant, vain, and dismissive of others. He believed he was the greatest general in the British Army, and he was not shy about saying so. He criticized his superiors. He ignored orders he disagreed with. He courted journalists and cultivated his public image. He wore a beret with 2 cap badges, a trademark that became iconic. He was brilliant, insufferable, and impossible to work with. These 2 men, Patton and Montgomery, were destined to clash. They represented not just different personalities, but different philosophies of war, and when they were thrown together in the same theater, the result was inevitable. The rivalry began in Sicily in July 1943. The Allied invasion of Sicily, Operation Husky, was the first major combined British-American operation in Europe. The plan was simple: land on the southern coast, drive north, and capture the island. Montgomery's 8th Army would land on the east coast and drive toward Messina, the key port at the northern tip of the island. Patton's 7th Army would land on the west coast and protect Montgomery's flank. From the beginning, Patton resented his secondary role. He believed he was being used as Montgomery's supporting act, and he was right. The plan had been designed by Montgomery and approved by General Harold Alexander, the overall commander, who was British. The assumption was that the British 8th Army, veterans of North Africa, were the main striking force. The Americans, inexperienced and untested, would play a supporting role. Patton was determined to prove otherwise. He landed his forces, established a beachhead, and immediately began driving inland. Instead of waiting to protect Montgomery's flank, he pushed west and north, capturing Palermo on July 22nd. It was a spectacular advance, fast, aggressive, and dramatic. The American press celebrated Patton as a hero, but strategically it meant nothing. Palermo was not a key objective. The Germans were retreating toward Messina on the eastern side of the island. Montgomery's advance toward Messina was the decisive operation. Patton's dash to Palermo was a sideshow. Montgomery said as much. In interviews, he dismissed Patton's achievement, noting that the Americans had faced little resistance and that the real fighting was in the east. Patton was furious. He believed Montgomery was stealing credit, diminishing American contributions, and promoting himself at Patton's expense. Patton decided to race Montgomery to Messina. He redirected his forces eastward and drove hard along the northern coast. His soldiers advanced rapidly, fighting through rough terrain and German rear guards. On August 17, 1943, Patton's forces entered Messina 3 hours before Montgomery's 8th Army arrived. Patton was triumphant. He had beaten Montgomery. He had proven that American forces could move faster, fight harder, and achieve more than the British. He stood in the central square of Messina and waited for Montgomery to arrive. When Montgomery finally showed up, Patton greeted him with exaggerated politeness, as if welcoming a guest who had arrived late to a party. Montgomery was not amused. He dismissed the race as irrelevant. He pointed out that most of the German forces had escaped to the Italian mainland, that the Allies had failed to cut them off, and that the strategic objective of the campaign, trapping and destroying the German army, had not been achieved. He was right, but Patton didn't care. He had won the race, and Montgomery's inability to acknowledge that only deepened Patton's contempt. The rivalry intensified during the Italian campaign. After Sicily, the Allies invaded mainland Italy in September 1943. Montgomery's 8th Army landed at the toe of Italy and advanced slowly up the eastern coast. The American 5th Army, commanded by General Mark Clark, landed at Salerno and advanced up the western coast. Patton was not involved. He had been temporarily relieved of command after the infamous slapping incidents, where he struck 2 soldiers suffering from battle fatigue, calling them cowards. Patton watched from the sidelines as Montgomery conducted the Italian campaign with his usual caution. The advance was slow, methodical, and frustrating. Montgomery refused to attack until his supply lines were secure, his artillery positioned, and his forces rested. The Germans retreated slowly, fighting delaying actions, destroying bridges, and fortifying defensive positions. The Italian campaign became a grinding, bloody stalemate. Patton, observing from England, was convinced he could have done better. He believed Montgomery was wasting time, that a more aggressive commander could have driven the Germans out of Italy in weeks instead of months. He said so to anyone who would listen. He wrote in his diary that Montgomery was a tired little fart and overly cautious to the point of timidity. Montgomery, for his part, had little respect for Patton. He considered him reckless, undisciplined, and more concerned with personal glory than military effectiveness. He told his staff that Patton was a good soldier, but a poor general, that he did not understand the complexities of modern warfare, and that his aggressive tactics would lead to unnecessary casualties. The mutual contempt was complete, but the worst was yet to come. In December 1943, General Dwight D. Eisenhower was appointed Supreme Allied Commander for Operation Overlord, the invasion of France. He faced an immediate problem: how to manage his 2 most difficult subordinates, Patton and Montgomery. Eisenhower needed both men. Montgomery was a proven commander with experience in North Africa and Italy. He was respected by the British public and government. Eisenhower appointed him commander of all ground forces for the initial phase of the invasion. Patton, despite his recent disgrace, was the best American armored commander. Eisenhower wanted him to lead the Third Army once the breakout from Normandy began. But Patton was controversial. Many American politicians and journalists demanded he be relieved. Eisenhower stood by him, but insisted that Patton keep a low profile. Montgomery, as ground forces commander, was technically Patton's superior. Patton hated this. He believed he was a better general than Montgomery. He resented taking orders from a man he considered overcautious and self-promoting. But he had no choice. If he wanted a combat command, he had to accept Montgomery's authority. The invasion took place on June 6, 1944. Montgomery commanded the British and Canadian forces in the east, near Caen. The plan was for Montgomery to capture Caen quickly, break out into open country, and draw German panzer divisions toward the British sector. This would allow the Americans in the west to break out and sweep around the German flank. But Montgomery did not capture Caen quickly. The city was supposed to fall on D-Day. It did not fall until July 9th, over a month later. Montgomery's advance was slow, grinding, and costly. The Germans reinforced the sector with panzer divisions, exactly as Montgomery had hoped. But critics argued that Montgomery was stuck, that he had failed to break through, that the operation was behind schedule. Patton, watching from England, was livid. He was not yet in France. His Third Army was being held in reserve, waiting for the breakout. He believed Montgomery's caution was wasting time and wasting American lives. He wrote in his diary, "Monty is a tired little man. He is not a bold commander. He never takes risks. He never attacks unless he has overwhelming superiority. And now he is stuck at Caen while American boys die waiting for him to move." Montgomery defended his plan. He argued that by drawing German armor to the British sector, he was enabling the American breakout. He insisted that the slow advance was deliberate, that it was part of a larger strategy, and he was right. The American breakout, Operation Cobra, launched on July 25th, succeeded precisely because the Germans had committed their best divisions to stopping Montgomery. But Patton did not see it that way. He believed Montgomery was making excuses for failure, that the British had failed to break out, and that the Americans were having to win the battle for them. On August 1st, 1944, Patton's Third Army became operational, and everything changed. Patton exploded out of Normandy like a force of nature. His tanks drove south into Brittany, then east toward Paris, then north toward Belgium. In 1 month, his army advanced over 400 miles, liberated Paris, crossed the Seine, and reached the German border. It was one of the most spectacular advances in military history. The contrast with Montgomery's methodical advance could not have been starker. While Montgomery carefully consolidated his positions, cleared pockets of resistance, and ensured his supply lines were secure, Patton simply drove forward. He bypassed enemy strongpoints. He ignored his flanks. He outran his supplies. He radioed back to headquarters. "Send me gas and ammo. I can win this war in 2 weeks." Eisenhower was impressed but alarmed. Patton's advance was brilliant but reckless. His supply lines were overextended. His tanks were running out of fuel. The logistics system, struggling to supply all the Allied armies through the small port of Cherbourg and the beaches of Normandy, could not keep up with Patton's pace. And then came the critical decision that would define the final phase of the European campaign and reignite the Patton-Montgomery rivalry with a fury that nearly tore the alliance apart. By early September 1944, the Allies faced a choice. They had advanced so quickly that their supply lines were stretched to the breaking point. There was not enough fuel, ammunition, and supplies to support all the armies advancing simultaneously. Eisenhower had to prioritize. He had to decide which army would receive the bulk of supplies and which would be told to slow down. Montgomery proposed Operation Market Garden, an ambitious plan to drop paratroopers behind German lines in Holland, seize key bridges, and open a route into northern Germany. If successful, Montgomery argued, the Allies could bypass the heavily fortified Siegfried Line, cross the Rhine, and reach the industrial heart of Germany, the Ruhr, before winter. The war, Montgomery promised, could be over by Christmas. But Market Garden required resources. Montgomery's 21st Army Group needed priority on supplies. That meant other armies, including Patton's 3rd Army, would have to halt. Patton was enraged. He believed he was on the verge of breaking into Germany. His tanks were at the German border. The German army was in retreat. All he needed was fuel. If Eisenhower gave him priority, Patton insisted, he could reach the Rhine, cross it, and drive into the heart of Germany. He could end the war faster than Montgomery ever could. Eisenhower faced an impossible choice. Both men were demanding priority, both had compelling arguments, and both were threatening to resign if they didn't get their way. Eisenhower made a compromise decision. He gave Montgomery the resources for Market Garden. But he also allowed Patton to continue limited operations. It was a decision that satisfied neither man and arguably prolonged the war. Market Garden was launched on September 17, 1944. It was a disaster. The paratroopers were dropped too far from their objectives. German resistance was stronger than expected. The ground forces could not break through to relieve the paratroopers. The operation failed. Thousands of Allied soldiers were killed or captured. The bridge at Arnhem, the farthest objective, was never secured. Patton was vindicated. He had predicted that Montgomery's plan would fail. He had argued that giving Montgomery priority was a mistake, and he had been proven right. Montgomery characteristically refused to admit failure. He argued that Market Garden had been 90% successful, that only the final bridge had not been taken, and that with more resources the operation would have succeeded. He blamed the failure on insufficient support from Eisenhower and inadequate supplies. Patton's response was unprintable. He wrote in his diary, "Montgomery has failed again. He is a cautious, self-serving egotist who cares more about his reputation than winning the war. He wastes resources, wastes time, and wastes lives. And then he blames everyone else when his overcomplicated plans fail." The animosity was now total. The two men could barely speak to each other. Eisenhower had to keep them apart at meetings to prevent arguments. The rivalry reached its peak during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. The Germans launched a massive surprise offensive in the Ardennes, breaking through American lines and threatening to reach the supply port of Antwerp. The situation was critical. Eisenhower needed to respond quickly. He made a controversial decision. He temporarily placed all American forces north of the breakthrough under Montgomery's command. This was done for practical reasons. Montgomery's headquarters was closer, and he could coordinate the northern response more effectively than General Omar Bradley, whose headquarters was south of the breakthrough. But Patton saw it as a betrayal. He believed Eisenhower was giving Montgomery credit for rescuing the Americans, that it was a public relations move to appease the British, and that American forces were being subordinated to British command unnecessarily. Montgomery made things worse. At a press conference on January 7, 1945, he implied that British forces had saved the Americans, that American commanders had been caught by surprise and overwhelmed, and that only his intervention had prevented disaster. The American press erupted in fury. American generals, including Bradley, threatened to resign. Eisenhower was forced to issue a public statement clarifying that the Battle of the Bulge had been primarily an American battle, won by American soldiers, and that Montgomery's role had been limited. Montgomery was forced to issue a half-hearted apology, but the damage was done. Patton never forgave him. He wrote, "Montgomery is a congenital liar. He takes credit for others' victories and blames others for his failures. He is the most overrated general in history." The war ended in May 1945. Patton's Third Army had driven deep into Germany and Czechoslovakia. Montgomery's 21st Army Group had crossed the Rhine and advanced into northern Germany. Both men claimed to have played the decisive role in defeating Nazi Germany. The rivalry did not end with the war. Montgomery published his memoirs in 1958, in which he criticized American generalship and claimed that the Allied victory had been due primarily to British leadership and planning. Patton, who had died in a car accident in December 1945, could not respond. But his admirers, his biographers, and the American military establishment spent decades defending his reputation and attacking Montgomery's. So why did Patton hate Montgomery so much? The surface answer is obvious: personality clash, professional rivalry, and clashing military philosophies. Patton was aggressive, Montgomery was cautious. Patton believed in speed, Montgomery believed in preparation. Patton led from the front, Montgomery planned from headquarters. But the deeper answer is more complex. Patton hated Montgomery because he represented everything Patton despised. Caution masquerading as wisdom, self-promotion masquerading as leadership, and success achieved through political maneuvering rather than battlefield courage. Patton believed that war was about will, aggression, and the refusal to accept defeat. He believed that a great general inspired his men through personal example, that he led charges, that he risked his life alongside his soldiers. Montgomery did none of those things. He stayed in his headquarters, issued orders, and managed his public image. And yet Montgomery was successful. He won battles. He was celebrated. He was promoted. And Patton could not accept that a man he considered his inferior was treated as his equal, or even his superior. Montgomery, for his part, despised Patton because he represented everything Montgomery had learned to reject during his years in the trenches of World War I. Patton was reckless. He took unnecessary risks. He prioritized glory over the lives of his men. Montgomery had seen too many soldiers die in futile attacks, led by officers like Patton. He had vowed never to waste lives that way. In the end, both men were right about each other. Patton was reckless. Montgomery was cautious. Patton achieved spectacular results through audacity. Montgomery achieved steady results through preparation. Both were brilliant. Both were flawed. Both were necessary. The tragedy is that they could not see that. They could not recognize that the Allies needed both of them. Patton to break through, Montgomery to consolidate, Patton to inspire, Montgomery to organize. They were complementary, not contradictory. But ego, pride, and national rivalry blinded them. They spent more energy competing with each other than cooperating. And while their rivalry may have added drama to the campaign, it also added delays, wasted resources, and prolonged the war. Eisenhower knew this. He spent years managing their egos, soothing their pride, and preventing their rivalry from destroying the alliance. He succeeded. The Allies won. Germany was defeated. But the hatred never faded. Patton died believing Montgomery was a fraud. Montgomery died believing Patton was a fool. And historians have debated ever since which one was right. Perhaps the answer is that neither was. They were two great generals who could not see past their own egos to recognize greatness in each other. They were warriors who fought each other almost as fiercely as they fought the enemy. And that is why Patton hated Montgomery. Not because Montgomery was wrong, but because Montgomery was different, and Patton could not accept that there was more than one way to win a war.